Governor Gretchen Whitmer, welcome back to Pod Save America.
Good to be with you, Jen.
So you were with Donald Trump yesterday in Michigan when he announced an expansion of the Selfridge Air National Guard base, I believe starting in 2028. You've been fighting to get that done for a long time. It means a lot of jobs. It's really good for the economy. You called it a big bipartisan win, said you appreciated Trump's partnership. What did it take to get that done with the president? Did he need convincing? Like, how did those discussions go?
Well, I'll just start with this. Selfridge is a really important linchpin in Michigan's bases. We've got four. Selfridge is the place where we have our fighter mission. The A-10s have been scheduled to be retired. And so I have spent every year since I've been governor trying to get recapitalized a fighter mission. Through the 4 years, to be candid, under the Biden administration, I was trying to get this done. We did get tankers, which is great, but it's not a fighter mission. So soon as I had the opportunity for the first conversation at the National Governors Association dinner, I took the chance to say this is important. And ever since then, I've had a number of meetings and phone calls just to try to get this over the finish line. And I'm grateful that they were interested. I know they care about Michigan. I think defense is a place where they see a need, and it took a lot of work to get there, but it's the right thing for Michigan. There's no question that recapitalizing this, it's got $850 million impact on the state of Michigan. 30,000 jobs are connected to Selfridge. And so this is a BFD. And I'm glad that we got over the finish line. It doesn't mean I've abandoned any of my values. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to stand my ground and fight where we have to. But this is one of those moments where, as a public servant, you're reminded your job is to put service above self, and that's what it was all about.
So you do this event with the president. Then he does a political event in Michigan, which you didn't attend, where he attacks judges for, quote, trying to take away the power of our president. Then he does an interview after with ABC where he says he could facilitate the release of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, as the Supreme Court has ordered in a unanimous decision, but that his lawyers don't want to. Is the president not in open defiance of the Supreme Court at this point?
Yeah, I mean, it's unconscionable. So many of the actions that they've taken in 100 days, the amount of damage that has been done. I continue to stay grounded in talking to Michiganders, and I can tell you that the tariffs are taking a toll. Job losses, concerns about, being able to afford an F-150. When I was at the White House, and that folder in that infamous picture, inside that were real stories from Michiganders about how hard the tariffs have already been on their families, on their businesses, small businesses alike. And that's who I'm fighting for. And so to see that, to hear that, you could see why, there's no way on earth I was doing anything beyond that press conference yesterday. Because I think so much of what they're doing is damaging not just here and now, but they're going to have long-term consequences in this country. And that's precisely why I think it's important that we are showing up, we are locking arms, and we are the party that is fighting for the average hardworking person in this country.
I do want to get to the tariffs, but before we do, um, do you think we're in a constitutional crisis? If the Supreme Court has told the president to do something, he has decided not to do it. I think this is the second time he's done this.
Yeah.
He's also not enforcing the TikTok ban, just sort of ignoring that or ignoring the court's order on that. Are we in a constitutional crisis? And what's the responsibility of other leaders in the country if we are?
We are, and I think that no one is above the law. The thought that we've got an administration that is just blatantly violating court orders should, I think, scare everybody. This is a very serious moment. At the end of the day, I hope that we finally see some backbone out of some of the Republicans in Congress, you know, to stand up to the courts to enforce their orders. I mean, there are a lot of people that aren't doing their jobs to protect the foundations of this country. And many of us are fighting the fights that we can, but ultimately, the courts have got to be able to have the last word. And this undermines, I think, the foundations of our country on every level when this happens.
The president went on to say in that interview that he's justified in ordering criminal investigations into people he thinks are dishonest. You were obviously unwittingly brought into the Oval for the press event where Trump ordered an investigation into one of his first term administration officials because he said the 2020 election wasn't fraudulent. State election officials responded to that saying they are outraged and alarmed. This was a cybersecurity election official. What was your reaction when you saw him do that and you were in the Oval?
Well, as as Lovett said, there are no corners in the Oval Office, right?
Yeah.
I was brought in for what I thought was going to be a one-on-one meeting. It became very clear as soon as I walked in the room that that was not the case. I grabbed one of his staff people. I said, "What is happening here?" And he said, "He's just going to sign executive order, and then you're going to have your meeting." And then all of that transpired, and I gravitated from the front of the room to the back of the room, and that's when that picture was taken. But I also left the room. No one reported that. I left the room to go talk to my staff person and said, we got to get word out because the stuff that's going on in there, I cannot be associated with that. I do not endorse that. I'm not here for that. But I had to stay and have my meeting after that was done. So, it is not easy to navigate these times. But one of the things that I've learned is I've got to put the people of Michigan first over my self-interest, over maybe what people assume are going to be my political interests. The people of Michigan come first. I took an oath to them. When I was in the Senate, we were in the minority. I was the Senate minority leader, and we had Republican control of both chambers of the legislature and in the governor's office. We got our teeth kicked in every day. I had colleagues who, when they finally wanted to do Medicaid expansion, a Republican governor wanted to expand Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act to Michiganders. Some of my Democratic colleagues said, hell no, let's not do it. Let's make him beg for it. Let's deliver him a loss, and then they'll have to come back. And I didn't want to take that risk because I knew hundreds of thousands of Michiganders might get their health care from this. And so I went to work to bring my Democratic colleagues along. It wasn't easy, but at the end of the day, that's the job. That is the job that I have. And if we Democrats want to be successful in future elections, we can't forget that. We got to give each other the grace to fight on the battlefield and lock arms, because these are high stakes moments in this country as we think about all the stuff that's just happened in merely 100 days.
Trump is currently investigating Michigan colleges and universities for their diversity policies. He's already tried to kick dozens of Michigan foreign students out of the country. He's threatening to unlawfully freeze federal funding for Michigan public schools, as he's already doing in Maine, because Governor Mills spoke up in a meeting. Have you asked the president to stop targeting people and institutions in your state?
You know what? I have talked to the president about tariffs, which obviously we don't agree on. I have talked to the president about Asian carp that pose a real threat to the Great Lakes. I have talked to the president about ice storm victims in northern Michigan, who I'm hoping we can get some help from FEMA to support. I have not had that direct conversation on this subject yet, but I'm not afraid to do that.
Yeah, I guess where I am on this is like I totally understand the need to work with even this president because whether we like it or not, he has a lot of power to help or hurt people that, in your case, that you represent. But he's also abusing that power right now to hurt people that you represent. And so I wonder if isn't it worth speaking up for the rights and the freedoms of those people when you're at an event with them or when you're in a meeting with them?
Yeah, whenever I get the opportunity, I use every minute of that to cover a lot of different issues. So this is, I think, a very important one that you're raising. There's no question, and I will continue whenever I have opportunities to make sure that I'm covering as much as I can. No question.
On tariffs, the president offered some relief to automakers last night. He announced, though the headline in the Detroit Free Press is Trump scales back tariffs on automakers, but analysts still expect car prices to rise. Do you agree with that? And did you get a chance to raise tariffs with him on Tuesday, and what have those conversations been like about tariffs with him?
I did not get much of a chance to talk about it on Tuesday, but I did say that the big three and the auto industry is hurting in Michigan because of the uncertainty around tariffs. Certainly this newest policy might be somewhat helpful on paper, but let's be clear, the uncertainty that has been created by a variety of policies without a stated goal and an obvious solution here is what is creating paralysis, what is creating animosity with our northern neighbors, Canada, who is intertwined with the Michigan economy, as all across the country that's true, but especially in Michigan, and Mexico, treating our allies like adversaries. I mean, there's a big cost to all of this, and it is going to be borne by the American consumer. It is going to be borne by the person who gets laid off because their company doesn't make the investment that they had planned to. It's going to be borne by small businesses. They can't stock up storerooms like some businesses have been able to in preparation for all these ups and downs. This chaos with this tariff policy has undermined the American economy and has taken money out of people's pockets, and that's the worst part of it. So a couple of tweaks every few days doesn't fix the problem. It actually um, perpetuates the pain.
In your conversations with him, do you get the sense that he's persuadable on this issue?
No,
Mm.
I'm sorry to say that. I mean,
Yeah.
I'll just be blunt. I can tell you that I know that the auto companies are talking with the White House. I'm talking with them too. I know that they are talking with Secretary Lutnick and Commerce. And obviously, they've had some impact in that they've reevaluated some things, but I do believe that there is a core belief that messing with tariff policy is going to be good for America, but it's not based on any, I think, economic prowess or strategy. And I think that's the biggest concern is that if there was a goal, if there was a new rule that was going to last, American business might be able to figure a way to work with it, but the chaos is the biggest problem at the moment.
I remember when the fires hit Los Angeles, I interviewed Governor Newsom shortly after, and he was dealing with somewhat similar to what you were dealing with Selfridge, which is he was trying not to criticize Trump too much because we needed to get federal funding for disaster relief for California. And I asked him in the interview, I said, are you scared that if you criticize him too much or piss him off, then he's going to yank federal funding and not give us the disaster relief aid that we need? Do you worry in the next couple years that if you criticize Donald Trump too much, that he might change his mind on Selfridge?
No, I mean, I don't. They've made a commitment. There are Republicans and Democrats that have been working hard to get this done. They got it done. He got great, headlines here in Michigan. I mean, people are thrilled with this. So, no, and my job is to fight for Michiganders, and that means, John, it means making tough decisions in a pandemic that ultimately people threaten to kill me.
Mhm.
I'm still going to put Michiganders first. It means showing up at the Oval Office and maybe having people, pundits take shots at me for being there, but that's putting the people of Michigan first. I can tell you right now that the people in Macomb County are often the ones that get pulled whenever there's a presidential election. They're
Yeah.
the bellwether in a bellwether state. They don't care, you know, whether or not I held up a folder in a picture. They don't care. They care if they're going to have a job. They care that their governor's fighting for them. And I think that's the really interesting difference here is the media in Michigan has been it's all been positive. The reactions, not the media reactions, but the coverage, the people, the reaction of the real people on the ground. And it's one of the things that real frustrate me about sometimes the national pundits is they're telling Michiganders what they're thinking without actually talking to Michiganders. And I think that's something that we have to educate people on because, man, if you're ever going to be able to fight for and earn the respect of people on the ground, you gotta be there with them, and that's what it's all about.
Your neighboring governor, J.B. Pritzker of Illinois, gave a speech this week where he called for mass protests, mobilization, and disruption. He said, quote, "These Republicans cannot know a moment of peace. They have to understand that we will fight their cruelty with every megaphone and microphone that we have." Do you agree with all that?
Yeah, no, I do. I mean, I think I'm glad I told JB, I don't know, a couple months ago, I'm glad he's out there. I'm glad he's fighting. You know what? I'm really glad that AOC and Bernie are out there fighting. I think it's going to be important. We got to be Avengers style, every one of our voices matters. We have to work together. And ultimately, we're going to have to bring all these different groups of people that we're talking to, that we represent together as well. So I don't fault anyone outside the Michigan for not understanding what's going on the ground. I just, take umbrage with anyone who assumes they know what's going on the ground without actually asking, because the real story is what's going on in real people's lives.
Yeah, and obviously people in Michigan, just like elsewhere in America, are very concerned about more than anything else, cost of living issues and the effects of this trade war. Do you think people in Michigan are also afraid of this president and wonder that if he poses a threat to democracy, if we're gonna have other elections?
Yeah, I do think that that's a concern for a lot of people. If you're not worried about putting food on the table, yes, but if you're worried about putting food on the table or paying your electric bill,
Mm.
it's hard to think about anything else. And that's one of the things that, as I campaigned for Kamala Harris and Joe Biden before and Barack Obama before, I can tell you that, and Hillary Clinton, I can't skip Hillary Clinton, of course. Um, we know that the personal economy is always going to be, front and center for people. And that's why we got to stay focused on how are Democrats making people's lives better. That's what I've done in Michigan. And I think that's why I've been able to carry this really swing state by double digits in 2 elections. We can't lose sight of that.
Yeah. Last question: in your role as governor, are there other issues where you are looking to make progress by working with President Trump? And are there other fights you can see yourself having with the administration?
Oh, yeah, we're going to fight like hell to protect people. The Medicaid cuts could be devastating if they go through. And we are working really hard. We've got a bipartisan group of Congress people that we are putting pressure on. 40% of the Michigan budget is federal. Rural hospitals will close if those Medicaid cuts go through to pay for, that tax break that no one's calling for. So yeah, we're going to fight on all these battlegrounds. I'll also say I'm going to continue to try to get help to protect the Great Lakes from Asian carp. I am going to try to get that FEMA declaration for people in northern Michigan who were devastated by the ice storm last month, some of whom still don't have power a month later. So I've got big things that I still want to try to get done with the feds, but we're gonna fight to protect Michiganders, fight to protect fundamental rights and the rule of law too.
Governor Whitmer, thank you so much, as always, for giving us your time and coming on Pod Save America.
Thanks, John. Good to be with you.